Hello, welcome to Transformations Café, where we're serving love as bold as light. I'm your host, Ken Marks. Transformations Cafe is brought to you by the Institute for Global Transformation, or IFGT. We're a nonprofit, all volunteer organization, and our vision is a world working together to utilize the power, love, and wisdom of higher consciousness to benefit humanity and the planet. Our mission is to support transformations in consciousness and the way humanity interacts with one another so as to bring about positive change in the world individually and collectively. We
Mhm.
dearly hope that you will visit us at our website, theglobaltransformation.org. There's much more information about who we are, what we do, and scads of resources. And you can also find a join button at the top of each page on the site if you would like to join our worldwide community of change makers. And there's also a donate button at the top of each page if you'd like to support our work, including programs like this one. Want to know when this and any other new material is published on our channel, just hit the notification bell icon. I first met our guest, Lisa Smartt, when she was working with Dr. Raymond Moody, and she helped us arrange our interview with Dr. Moody and his co-author, Paul Perry. And that interview, which we discussed their first book on shared death experiences, is available on our YouTube channel if you have an interest in checking that out. And at that time, Lisa, you were working with Dr. Moody on a project called the Final Words Project, and you also wrote your book, Words at the Threshold, and that offers the early findings of that investigation. Is that still going on, by the way? Is that an
Um,
ongoing?
I'm looking at now picking it up. Yes, we're still collecting data. I have so
Okay.
much data, and I'm hoping to do a sequel.
Neat, neat. So, um, and then since then, a few years have passed, and Lisa's experienced several profound and kind of transformational life changes. And that's going to be really the focus of our conversation today. And Lisa's name came up when we were actually searching for guests who could help us do a couple of things that we're bringing more into IFGT and especially this program where we're trying to do a couple of things. One is as we continue to evolve as a species and our individual and collective consciousness is also evolving, the things that happen, the experiences and the phenomena that are often, or at least historically, kind of viewed as unusual, maybe weird, maybe woo-woo. We want to normalize that because they're not just available to the few. They're really part of a growing experience of us as people. And so we want to do that. And then also to continue to integrate our spiritual lives and journeys with our everyday human lives. And so uh, Lisa's name came up in a search for speakers that could help with that. So that's also going to be part of what we are looking at this evening. So I want to read a brief bio so those of you not familiar with Lisa Smartt get a little better sense of her background, and then we'll get into our conversation. So Lisa Smartt, MA, is a linguist, educator, poet, and composer whose work explores the intersection of language, consciousness, and creativity.
Mhm.
She is the author of Words at the Threshold, What We Say When We're Nearing Death, which was published by New World Library in 2017. And this was based on research from the project I mentioned before, the Final Words Project, which is an ongoing study devoted to gathering and interpreting the language of those nearing death. She has worked closely with Raymond Moody, co-facilitating presentations on language and consciousness at universities, hospices, and conferences. Her current work explores storytelling, creativity, and the integration of spiritual insight into everyday life, including the role of personal narrative and creative expression in healing and transformation. And again, I also want to thank you, Lisa, for accommodating our schedule. Lisa recently moved to another time zone, So she's joining us in the very early morning hours of her day. So thanks for doing that. Really appreciate you making that accommodation. So with that, Lisa, welcome to Transformations Cafe. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Ken. And it's really a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'm in Ireland at 1 o'clock in the morning. And I was just really delighted when I heard from Ken. We had spoken years ago, and just the opportunity to speak with other people who are kind of on the path, looking at transformation and creating lives that are more fulfilling and finding a sense of purpose and meaning. I was just really drawn to the intention and purpose of this conversation and tonight. I wanted to say one thing just because it came up, and it was a memory something I hadn't remembered for a long time. I wrote this book called "Words at the Threshold" that looked at what people said before they passed on, and I worked with Dr. Moody, who's done a lot of research into consciousness, asking the question: is there life after death? Does consciousness continue? And I looked at people's final words to see if I could find clues about is there an afterlife or do we continue on? And what happened is, and this hooks back to the idea of love, and that's why I'm bringing it up. As I mentioned before Ken's introduction, I was contacted by Richard Bach's son. Richard Bach wrote several books. One was Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And the son said, "My father is dying, and we're reading your book together right now. And he would like to be in conversation with you." And I was, honored. Richard Bach, I mean, I read everything he wrote, and I was like, oh my gosh, absolutely. So we got into this conversation, and he was telling me he was certain that he was dying. He was writing these incredibly articulate emails to me, and we spoke a couple times on the phone. I said, Richard, I don't think you're dying. I don't think you're dying. And he said, "No, I am." I said, "Have you been to a doctor? I mean, do you have a diagnosis? I mean, it's not my place, but your language, I don't see signs of you dying here." And I said, "What's happening in your life? I'm just curious." And he started telling me that he was very, very, very depressed. And he was living on a little island near Orcas Island. I don't know the area, so bear with me, but in the area where I think you live, Catherine, somewhere near there. And he was living alone and kind of very isolated. I mean, he was someone who had a lot of money, was very well known, but at this time in his life, he was living alone and became severely depressed when someone he loved very much broke up with him a few years earlier. And I said, Richard, I think you're depressed. I said, "Are you eating? I mean, I know your sons are there." He said, "Well, I don't really eat that much, and my kids don't come by that much, or, my children." I said, "Tell you what, let's get you a housekeeper, someone to just be around to cook for you, to someone." So I looked for someone. I found this delightful young woman who was, full of vivacious energy, and she was beautiful and a little flirtatious and just lovely and sparkly. And she started working for him. And I'll be darned, he got out of bed. And about 6 weeks later, he checked in with me. He said, "I don't think I'm dying."
Ah,
He said, "I think I just needed love in my life." And I said,
oh,
"I think you needed love in your life." And so I had totally forgotten that was one of the things that came out of the experience with Words at the Threshold. But when you started talking about living in British Columbia, I was remembering that really, and I still had the emails between him and me because they were really kind of a magical set of conversations. So, definitely love is a powerful thing, however it expresses itself in our lives. And of course, that's one very, very vivid example. And I think he's still living, if I recall
no,
correctly.
neat. No, thanks for sharing that story. That's a great way to start. But for those who may not be familiar, Dr. Moody coined the term near-death experience, and now, of course, that he wrote his first book on the subject in the 1970s, and now it's this, very burgeoning and active field of research and continuing to gather information, and it's really become a huge part of our evolution too, and understanding so much more about life and death and our connections to other things. And so it's not trivial, but I do know that not everybody recognizes Raymond Moody as a household name. So wanted to say that. But thanks for sharing the story, Lisa. That actually is such a great introduction to one of the main things that we want to hear from you about tonight. And we titled the program in our promotions, Making Love Real. And you shared that expression with me when we caught up a month or so ago together. So let's start kind of with that, and maybe even start out, either you can just share kind of what got you to that. I think that's a great part of your growth and experience in the last few years, but kind of make sure we know what you mean when you say make love real.
That's great. Thank you. Um, yeah, I spent 10 years working with Dr. Raymond Moody, who is, as Ken said, the person who came up with the term near death experience. And what he found over and over again in the stories of people who died and then came back to life, what they shared about their experiences during their near death experiences was that the one thing, no matter what their religion was, no matter where they were from in the world, what they all said, that what they learned in the other world is that we're here on this earth to learn lessons of love. We're here to learn how to love, and we're here to have lessons. Well, so I went through 10 years of hearing conversations of these remarkable people who have had these NDEs and being very touched and inspired. But then one day, one of the people that Raymond had spoken to, and I heard the interview, um, the person was describing that they had this incredible near death experience. They saw the light. They knew that their life was about just loving others. But then he's out of the hospital. 3 days later, he's on the freeway in LA, and someone honks at him, and he turns around and gives him the finger, right? And so the gap between being in that heavenly and divine experience and then getting on the freeway, and someone honks at you, it's one thing to say, let's all love each other, but how do we make that real, right? So one of the things I began to think about for myself is, how do we, now that we all know, or we've heard so over and over again from literally thousands of people from their near death experiences, that our souls are here to learn lessons of love, how do we make that real? It's a great idea in theory, but when someone honks at you in the freeway, or if your husband, didn't do the laundry when he promised to, how do you make it real? So I think I began to ask that question because I just became curious about it, and on many levels. Well, just about that time that I began to think about that, my my second husband woke up one morning and announced to me that spirit told him it was time to leave the marriage. And I was, wait a minute, spirit didn't, I didn't get the, I didn't get the memo. And I shouldn't be laughing. But we were together like about 20 years, it was pretty serious business. I mean, we had dated and stuff, but we weren't married that whole time. But anyway, this was serious business. And he basically disappeared. Right. And I remember the night that he left, I was washing dishes and crying, and I was 61 at the time. And at the time, I thought that was old. Now I don't. I know it's just the beginning of life. But anyway, I was washing the dishes, and I was crying, and I was thinking, and I praying to what I call God or a higher power, my source. And I said, I really want to learn how to love because I just didn't see what was going on. Something was wrong here. There's some way I didn't connect. All I want is to make love real. I want to learn about how to love better. And I am going to be super honest. I am a really passionate person. I get a bad temper. I know that that's one of those things in my life that I don't make love real as much as I should and I could. And I knew that. And I was praying to God, like, I know there are many things about me that aren't loving. So I just prayed and I said, I want to learn more about how to love better. And and I thought, am I ever going to love again? And well, as the universe would have it, not too much afterwards, I went to California. I put the house in the market. I sold the market, sold the house. All kinds of things happened so that I was financially cared for. So that was good. Or, I was okay. I went to California, and while I was in California visiting my favorite uncle, he became very, very angry. And about something, and he had a heart attack and died in my arms. And it was devastating. He was like a brother to me. And so I was there with my aunt when it happened, and she was someone who did not believe in an afterlife or that spirit communicates with us, which I do believe now. Um, and I stayed with her and just helped her through the time and gave her the kind of comfort that came out of my research and came out of my heart about my feelings that consciousness continues. So I had that. I was there with her 5 weeks, about almost 6 weeks. I came back to my husband. Came back to. I guess I'm kind of. I'm sorry. The sequencing of the story. Anyway, I had that. Then when I came back from that, my husband left me, and then my daughter, who was 27, soon after, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and then so she was diagnosed with cancer at her home, and then my 27-year-old almost died from COVID and became um, completely. The first year she couldn't eat. I had to spoon feed her. She couldn't toilet herself. Basically, she was semi-comatose. I mean, she couldn't talk. So what happened to me is when my mother got sick, so my ex had left me, my uncle who I was very close to had passed on. My mother was dying, and upstairs my daughter, they couldn't do anything with her at the hospital. My daughter was basically my mother and my daughter at the same time were in diapers, you know. And I was like, uh, I have a very strong belief, very strong faith. And God said, well, here's your chance to learn to love. I mean, not in a mean way. I mean, because God never says it meanly, but here we go. Here we go. And I learned so much about unconditional loving in a way that I didn't know, in a way I didn't know. And I really served my mother and my daughter for those years. I had some help. I did get respite care. I wasn't all on my own. I hired someone to help me for a bit, all I could afford. But I gave up my business. I gave up my work with Raymond Moody. I gave up my everything. Everything I gave up to just take care of my mother and my daughter. And it was about a 3.5 year process. And it was something I never thought I'd have to go through. And you want to know something? I don't regret it. I really mean it. I am a better person now. I don't mean to sound corny, but that expression of polishing the stone. I really feel I am a more loving person now, and I feel like my heart is bigger, and my joy is bigger. You know. But what happened? My mother did pass away, and my daughter now is just beginning to learn to walk again, and recovery's been very, very, very slow, but the miracles are happening, and so forth. However, another crazy miracle in the middle of all this, I had my mother was very ill, my daughter was very ill, and one night I was like, I'm lonely. Um, the savings that I had was just disappearing because it was very expensive to try to keep everything going. And I just like, I'm going to go online and see if I can meet anyone. I just needed a distraction. And I met this guy who played music. And every night after I did caregiving, he would play songs for me. And he was like a kind of a rock and roll musician. And he would play for me. And he was retired. And after about 6 weeks, he said, listen, no strings attached. I'm going to come out and just help you out. You got a big burden on your shoulders. And my mother just fell in love with him, really enjoyed him. They were both born in the same hospital in New York, which is like insane. They were both born in Forest Hills, New York, in the hospital there. And so she was very close to dying, but she was holding on because she didn't want me to be left alone. So one day we were all standing there, and she said, and he, you should marry this guy. And I'm like, Mom, I've only known him. At that point, I think I only knew him about 8 weeks. I said, Mom, I haven't known this guy at all. She said, no, marry him, marry him. And he got down on his hands and knees and he said, marry me. And so I'll be damned. Uh, gosh, that was in November of 2022. So yeah, so I said, well, I'll get engaged. I'll get engaged. Well, um, we had the wedding in January. Actually, Renee was there, and it was bedside at my mother's bedside as she was very close to dying. After the wedding, she had the stroke that in which she passed on. It was about 7 days later. Let me see, maybe a little 10 days later. And I married this man who's I moved to Ireland. He was an Irish citizen, so we're here in Ireland, Ireland now. So I don't know. I mean, it's just, and my daughter is much better. Once we get to Ireland, she started walking. So it's just, I mean, I couldn't write this. I'm a writer, and I couldn't have made this stuff up, right? I couldn't have done it. But somehow, in all of it, there was this flow that I in every turn somehow I felt taken care of. Do you know what I mean? And I felt like the more I opened my heart, and I mean, believe me, life is hard. Life is hard all the time. It's where, cracks are where the light comes in. Rumi said it, Leonard Cohen said it. And I'm married to this person I barely knew, and I'm going to be honest, it's not easy. It's hard. We're learning to get along, and we're learning who we are. But he was there for me, and he's been there for me, and the miracles have been happening. And my daughter, cooked dinner for me tonight, which was a wonderful thing.
Oh,
After, yeah, truly,
beautiful. Yeah.
absolutely. So, and in the middle of all this, to keep a story just about the miracles, about what happens as we keep our heart open and we assume that what's going to happen is solutions are going to appear. For me, it's about living more and more just with the assumption that suffering is part of creating solutions. So going back in time a little bit after my husband had left me, and I was devastated, really heartbroken. I moved into this place in North Carolina where there were several artists living there, and I was crying. I had this little kind of in-law unit, crying all the time. I mean, just crying and grief, and terrible grief. And the person who was upstairs from me, he came down into my apartment and he said, "Girl, you got to do something. I mean, you got to do something. You're crying all the time. You're driving us all crazy. No man is worth this much. Just get over it." He was a creep, and I can't get over it. I can't. He said, No, I can't. He said, "Look, there's only one thing for you to do." I said, "Tell me, I'll do anything." "Write a musical." I said, "What?" He said, "Write a musical." So this guy, he was on Broadway when he was, when he was younger, and he was also a therapist or a counselor. He said, "Right, just get out your feelings through something. Don't just sit here and cry. Turn it into something. Turn it into something creative." So I said, "Okay, what the F?" I started taking piano lessons, started taking voice lessons. And it started out as a revenge musical. I mean, I was just, I had my three chords. It started out as a revenge musical. And now, 5.5 years later, this morning I just did the absolute finishing touch on the 16th and last song. And we're looking at production in a few months, So I guess what I'm saying is, you don't know where the cracks are, and you don't know how and where the light is going to come in. And that's, the magic of life. So that's to get the ball rolling here. Thanks.
Well, again, thank you so much for sharing. I mentioned to Lisa before we started recording, I think it's tremendously courageous for people to kind of go in public and share their stories with, not just because they like to hear themselves talk. This is all coming from a place of love and a place of service, and that the hopes of providing this example, both in many terms, not just the boldness to share, but also to help us all realize how those very difficult, hard things that I think most of us are going to encounter if we have enough years, and to be able to then um, find our ways through them and find the growth. And I want to talk about that a little bit, but I don't want to leave the the make love real kind of part of our conversation yet. One thing I just want to confirm, because you shared this story with me a month or two ago when we reconnected. Um, and I think I understood that you at least kind of perceive that when you were kind of stripped down to the essence and asked that higher connection, well, okay, well, show me, how to love or how to make love real, that the response was then the circumstance with your mother and daughter simultaneously.
I feel that. That's my story, right? I mean, because I do trust, some people may have said, "Oh, you were being punished for something," some old ideas about the way God works. The way I saw it was that God was giving me an offering to answer my biggest wish at that moment, which was to learn to love more, right? I mean, these are just stories or the way we map things. And so I could have thought anything else about it, but my experience was it was an opportunity for me to deepen as a person and that there was some door opening, right? There was some door opening. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying I couldn't love before, but it deepened my ability to love. And and yeah, I do feel it was, I mean, of course, I'm not saying an answer to prayer. It was horrible. It was horrible. And it wasn't all about me, right? It wasn't all about me. But I mean, it was like, it's not like God was like, oh, yeah, she wants to learn how to love. We're going to, I mean, no, 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 no. It doesn't work like that. It's just, it felt like, I don't know. Oh, maybe my husband leaving was a way to prepare me to be more humble for what I had to do. I don't know. I mean, all I know is my experience was I knew that I had to be a bigger hearted person. I knew
Hmm.
there was something in me that had to grow. I knew that. That was just my assumption. And partly that was my assumption from all the work I did with near death experiences that we're here to grow. That I don't believe that God is here to punish me. I don't believe that that's why I'm here. I don't believe when bad things happen, we're being punished. That's not what I believe. So my belief was when these things happen, it was like, I put out a prayer to learn how to love. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to deepen my ability to love. Now, it could be a whole nother story, or someone else could have another narrative, right? So I'm certainly not here to say that my narrative is the one that is the truth, but it's what helped me navigate and how I feel now. I feel like um, something shifted in me through those experiences and those years that I think polished the stone. Now when I get to heaven, God may go, oh boy, were you wrong. Oh, I get it. Okay, I have to tell you one more story, and that's it. That one more story. I have to. My mother, who was an atheist, both of my parents didn't believe in God. Um, so my mother was very, very close to dying, and she said, Lisa, I think I saw God. And I'm like, oh my God, that's wonderful. You're having like a near death. This is wonderful. Tell me. She said, you know that little yellow mustard sweater your father used to wear? She said, yeah. She said, God was wearing just one like that. And you know what? His name is Herb. She said, isn't it? I said, great, Mom. I think you saw God. Right. So, for her, God was Herb. And that was great. And she said, before I met Kevin, she said, this was before Kevin came into the scene, my new husband. She said, and Herb says you need to marinate. I don't know if that's like herbs marinating. I hadn't thought of that. But she said, Herb says you need to marinate a little more before you get a new husband. You need a little more marinating. I said, okay, I'll listen to Herb, whatever he says. Right. But for Mom, Herb was an old guy with a mustard colored sweater. And, so do you know what I'm saying? So it's not, it's anyway. So that's another story about our experience of who God is.
Yeah, interesting. Well, there's uh, probably a couple hours worth of things we could unpack in just this, but I think part of what is striking me as I hear this again and even more detail, um, one of the key things about your experience that turned in the way that it did, that so often and so easily could have gone in a very different direction. A lot of times, I think if people are faced with the types of things that you were, they could perhaps become just the opposite, resentful or cynical or feeling burdened and why me? And but instead this came in something of an answer to show me how to love or show me how love can be, more authentic in a way. And so here it was, and it sounds like it just your experience opened your heart and
And my
saw that
heart,
whole,
yeah.
yeah.
And there were definitely, I mean, my friend Renee, who's known me since I was 10, could tell you because I mean, there were days that I was totally resentful and all those things. I mean, I'm certainly not an angel at all. I mean, of course, there were days I was like, oh, why this? And it's not fair, of course. But I think all the work I did with near death experiences and final words really, because I heard so many people's stories, I just really believe or feel that we're here to polish the stone, that we're here to learn so that and I'm telling you, every day I still have to remind myself, I'm not, but we're here to learn lessons of love. And that's just was so engraved in me from all the work I did for 10 years with Dr. Moody, hearing so many stories. And yes, there were days that I felt resentful also. I mean, I just
So
want to be
with
clear that.
and with that very human kind of whole response, right? Because it wasn't that you just saw yourself as the angel of mercy and never had,
Exactly.
but was part of your experience of learning more about love, learning more about loving yourself.
Maybe.
Hmm.
Yeah, maybe. And maybe, yeah, maybe, and maybe not. Now that might be true more. Um, yeah, maybe a little of both. That is, but I mean, I really had to experience, I mean, both people I love the most in the world were at the edge of death, and nothing else existed except making sure they both got fed and diapered. I mean, I'm just being honest. I mean, and the stories. My daughter, this was still amazing to me. The first year she could barely talk. I mean, she wasn't able to communicate very much, maybe at the most 10 minutes a day at the most for the first year. And at the very end of that year, she started talking again.
Hmm.
And she said, Mom, um, do me a favor. I want to research every single person who's recovered. She was diagnosed with something called MECFS, and it's a type of long COVID that can be very, very, very serious. She said, I want you to start collecting videos of people who have recovered in any way from this illness. Find every single one that you can. And when I'm more capable and I'm ready and I can start looking at video, because she couldn't even look at videos at that point, I want to start researching every single person who's recovered and put together a way that I can heal from this.
Hmm.
And I started doing that, and a friend of hers helped. And by the second year, she was able to start looking at those videos. And she started putting together a healing protocol along with a doctor. We were also dealing medically, but a lot of, there were many pieces to creating healing for her. And that was an incredible journey. And I just, I guess I was so much at service of her and also the respect. I always loved her, but to see her at 28 years old and the deep respect that I developed for her and for the way she fought for her own healing and recovery. I developed, I loved her before. I mean, come on, I'm a mom and she's a great, lovely human being. But the level of love from soul to soul that I have for her now is nothing like I felt for her before. I mean, it's just deeper. It's a deeper love, and I experienced that deeper love, and I'd never experienced that kind of deep. deeper love. And with my mother too, of course, my mom and I, like all mothers and daughters, or many, we had issues and conflicts, and the healing that my mother was willing to do in those years as she was dying with me. Also, it was like in the company of souls, right? In the company of souls. And that's what those years, they were exhausting, they were hard. But I got the honor of being in the company of souls. And that work also allowed me to deepen my soul, I think. So in that way, maybe I did love myself more because there was a deepening, and that's a wonderful thing when we deepen, right?
Sure. Yeah. And so we talked a bit early in the uh, opening about, trying to integrate our spiritual and human lives. And you, I think, referenced something either you said or I wanted to hear about, there are still times where you can get angry or upset, the usual of, you do your meditation, everything's all bliss, and then you get in the car and that darn person in front of you, why don't they go faster? And so have you found that your experiences that you just shared so beautifully have helped you kind of maybe have more of just an open experience with life, or has it changed your everyday life, do you think?
Yeah, I do think it has, and the challenges continue, right? I've got this new husband who's very intense. He's a rock and roller, and he's from New York, and he worked for NYPD was his day job. He's a really intense guy, and suddenly, it's just it's I'm learning a lot about defensive language and how how people communicate with each other, and there is
Mhm.
so much to learn about living a good and loving life. And that's why making love real, if it were easy, the world wouldn't be in the condition it's in right now. I mean, making love real is just, we're all really wounded. I mean, I don't mean to speak for anyone here, but I'm wounded, and a lot of people I know are wounded. And my new husband, I mean, bless him for coming into my life, and he's a survivor of trauma, and so I guess what I want to say is it's really a daily work, right? It's like your garden. Gardens are beautiful and they yield incredible things, but the work is never done in your garden. It just isn't. I wish it were. But we learn things, and I do feel like my ability, like my daughter was saying to me, that my sense of equanimity is stronger.
Mm.
That she just sees a person who's much more mature and trustworthy in a certain in the deepest way. So I am a better person. I'm a more mature person. Again, I keep using the analogy of the polishing, but
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
day to day basis, I mean, gosh, I mean, it's hard not to have a fight when I feel someone's picking on me. you know, I was raised that. I mean, that's just who I am. I'm a feisty little critter, and so, and it's that same feistiness that got me through those 3.5, 4 years, right? It's the same that got me. Now I'm in Ireland. I'm in a whole new country. I mean, that's been a whole nother series of adaptation. So, I wish I could say that it was my lessons are done, but I'm happier. I'm happy.
Yeah, I mean that's huge given what you shared. And I also was also wondering, like, okay, are there any pearls that come out of this that we can all learn from Lisa about? And especially, you alluded a moment ago to look at the state of the world, and it really is in those times, that the really challenging times, both personally or on a more macro scale. And we've got conflict and upheaval, and so much of life seems to be challenging us to find a way to not live from fear. But one of the things I heard you just say, and kind of goes back to this idea of also learning how to love ourselves more authentically, is that it is not something that you're ever going to perfect, and you're never not going to be human. And so giving yourself the compassion to say, yeah, but you've grown from where you were yesterday or last year. And so I'm saying these things because I think I'm hearing it and I think I'm seeing it in what you're sharing and you're nodding. So I guess, yes, this is true.
Yeah, and Raymond Moody used to quote Eli Wiesel. I hope I'm Eli Wiesel. He used to say, "God made man because God loves stories." And I feel I'm a writer, and if if you had a story where you say, well, Jeannie Baxter was born and she had a great home life. And then she married this wonderful guy. And, then she went to the perfect college and she got this great job and she had the perfect two kids. And, who would read that book? You know, who
I
who would read that book? And so,
I think it's called Facebook.
yeah. Exactly. So, I think, Raymond and I used to joke that, God loves stories. So, sometimes when you look at each of our lives, if you look at a good, as a writer, I know there's certain things that make a good story. And unfortunately, one of the things that makes a good story is conflict and transformation. A character starts one way and then they have these battles and they fight them and then they win or they triumph or they grow. So it seems to be the nature of human beings that we have these stories, right? And I'm not diminishing the power of them or the reality of them to call them stories, but we're narrative animals. We're critters who are fueled and inspired and by story. That's who we are. And I think the more that we can sort of, I mean, again, I'm not saying dissociate from your life, be engaged, right? But at the same time, why I love writing music or writing stories or meditating, all those things allow the witness in me to step back and go, Holy Mother F. This is crazy what just happened, or Holy Mother F, I believe in something bigger. So I think the more we can develop the witness, I love to dance also. And when I dance, it's like I can just, the witness in me, the person in me who sees life for kind of the mystery it is.
And you told me you're working with people to write their stories and spiritual memoirs. So yeah, shifting gears a little bit into how what you've learned about our life stories and our spiritual stories.
I believe, because I do believe in a higher power, I do. And I do believe we're all here for a reason. I do believe that our lives have meaning and the stories that we have meaning. And many of us are seekers and we have incredible stories of our own spiritual journey. So I've worked with several people who have written their spiritual memoirs, who look at how some people maybe started not believing in anything, and then they had a series of experiences that led them to believing. And I love those stories. I love hearing people's sort of spiritual journeys, or some people just at very young had this sense that there was a God, just knew. I mean, we all have very different people. Some people have never had an experience of a higher power, but have had a deep connection to nature, and that's their higher power. That's their sense. So, anyway, there are many different types of spiritual memoirs, and yeah, I've helped people write them. There are many ways to do it. I mean, I have a wall in my office where I put post-its as ideas come, and I don't know. I don't know whether it's such a big topic. I don't know quite what to, maybe when questions come up. But our stories are really precious, and I would urge any of you who are curious about writing your own memoir to do it. And don't be afraid. It's a really,
But I think part of this that we talked about before, and it's interesting how these things happen because this keeps coming up in other conversations I've had since you and I talked a month or so ago, that our stories are usually going to include those challenges and adversities that uh, I haven't met a person yet that doesn't align with this notion that if I could have arrived where I am now without them, I would never choose to have to go through those, but I acknowledge that it's because of them that I've become who I am. And I think that's critical. And I think the wisdom that you shared with me was seeing this as part of our kind of collective essence of who we are. And then you are highlighting the importance of stories, of our stories.
And just like when you're watching a movie or reading a book and you're cheering on that protagonist and you're seeing what a hero he or she is, or, you're very sympathetic to their conflicts, or, we need to do the same thing. We are the best protagonist of our story. We are the hero of our story. I mean, that sounds kind of corny, but, to really see, have so much respect for our own struggle and our own story and the things that the universe has brought to us. And again, I'm not trying to sugarcoat stuff because, man, I know how hard things can be. But, as much as we can to see the offerings and just know that, our heroes are those people who overcome difficult things. And we have to believe that we are heroes and heroines and live our life that way. Since we're little kids, we learn about superpowers, right? That magical ring that's gonna, and it's almost for me my experience of source. And I do now believe in things like angels and stuff like that. Those kinds of, or the ancestors. I do have that experience. That tapping into those things are my superpowers, right? They're kind of my, that little decoder ring that helps me be a heroine. No, but it's nice to think of ourselves that way and to respect our stories and our struggles because life is hard. I mean, at least for me, it's been that way. Um, and we have to respect the heroic qualities, no matter how small those struggles are. So, yeah.
And yeah, I think you may have mentioned this, but Raymond Moody also had observations about this story, and you mentioned it, I think, briefly, but the importance of something, and I do want to credit my uncle who is in the audience tonight with kind of introducing me to this concept years ago, and it I think came to him after he had a particularly difficult, challenging time in life, and recognizing that the role of the witness and it can be in a couple of different forms. One is us cultivating the role of the observer, the witness of our own life, but then also the role of the importance of others in our lives that bear witness to our lives as well. Thoughts
Yeah.
about that? And is that accurate in terms of what Dr. Moody had observed?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are two things I want to respond to. One is Raymond talked a lot about, we live our lives in linear time when we're living. But when people who have near death experiences, they go back the other direction. So what happens is they have something called a life review. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but I'm going to assume you don't know just for a second. So what happens is people then are, once they go to the other side, the being of light is how most people describe it. A being of light comes, and then they look back at their lives, from the time of their death all the way back, and they look at everything they've done to other people, the good and the bad. But it's not that the way people describe it, or Raymond summarizes it, it's not that people, that there's a God going, you were so bad when you yelled at your daughter that way. Instead, what happens is we go back in the storyline backwards and we become the other person. We feel the other person's feeling. So so Raymond talked a lot about the narrative that we go forward and then in death we go back and then we enter into, the other characters experience. And, to hear that for all those years that I heard that working with Raymond, definitely kind of informed my ideas about how we're meant to live and what we're aiming for in this lifetime in terms of being compassionate. But it's not always easy to do that.
So something else that we emphasize in the Institute for Global Transformation is goes by many different names and labels. We refer to it as the Ageless Wisdom, which is just it comes in many forms throughout human history and different cultures and different places on the planet. But the essence of the wisdom is the wisdom. It's the same regardless of what form you may encounter. And in this particular context that we're talking about now, the wisdom teaches that there's growth through challenge, relationship, and conscious engagement with life. And also, and it's interesting too how these things happen. I just was listening to an interview with Ezra Klein and Pema Chodron, and they were talking about learning to not only live with, but in a way come to love discomfort. And it really is very similar to things. Again, the wisdom is the wisdom. I have come across the same notion through listening to a lot and reading a lot of Michael Singer. And you get this idea that learning how to just allow life as it comes to you to be, that includes being uncomfortable, that includes being mad and sad and burdened and all the full wholeness of our human life experience, and just finding ways to just allow it to be. The suffering comes from resistance.
Yeah, I worked with Anna Halprin in California, and she's a movement expressive arts therapist. And you had mentioned earlier the idea of the witness, which connects with what you're talking about. And what we would do in the dance classes is, you would just dance whatever comes up for you. And the great thing about moving physically, there are no words, right? So you can be really angry and just you dance it or express it that way. And you're not hurting anyone. You're not saying anything. You're just expressing it. But then what we would do in the class is other people would watch you do that, and then they would maybe respond with a dance movement back. But no one's getting hurt. You're expressing your feelings. You're letting it be. You're feeling the discomfort. You're expressing it. No one's getting hurt. You're witnessing each other. You're responding, hey, and and so we have to, and it helps develop the witness, because then you just realize, these are just feelings. You just dance them out. I mean,
Right,
they're feelings or
right.
discomfort. And I've struggled a lot in life with, like, I love cookies. I love sweet things. And that's one of the ways when I'm feeling pain that I'll deal with it. And, I'm trying not to do too much of that because I want to try to stay relatively healthy. And, there's a lot of emptiness and that kind of discomfort that I'm sure children and other people have talked about, sitting with the emptiness. It's tough. It's tough. So, how do we stay witness when we're feeling uncomfortable? Dance is one way, learning to meditate, and it continues for me to be a challenge, right? But it is the practice of living, is developing the witness and just letting whatever is there exist. But it's great, if you want to write a song or write a poem or dance a dance. I'm a really intensely emotional person, and I'm really grateful for the creative outlets I have, because it allows me to stay in my witness and not just make a whole bunch of drama and mess in my life. Because otherwise, the emotions are intense. I mean, all kinds of things can happen if you take them way too seriously.
Yeah. And that's back to this kind of also cultivating the role of the observer. So you can become increasingly more aware in the moment. Oh, I am experiencing this intense emotion. And you see it in the moment, that too. You reminded me also of energy. And you said you love cookies. And well, like, of course, cookies are full of love energy, right? I mean, that's that's the thing. And I know people, some very dear to me in this point in my life who are their way of their love language is through cooking and giving their creative. uh, talents and energy through food. You
which
know,
is
it's a real thing. It's part of life. It's life energy.
which is great. And yeah, and the question, yeah, which is wonderful. I love to cook. And when are we doing it to avoid or to discount or to run away from, which is different than just
Yeah.
joy of forget
Thank
to
you.
plug it in.
Well, you've also you're batting 1,000, Lisa, because you set up another segue for the kind of the last of the major areas I think we intended to explore tonight, which is the power of creativity and creative expression as spiritual experience. And you did share with us, of course, already about your musical. I don't know if there's more there, but you've done some other creative things and learning about that too. So let's explore that.
Um, Another thing I would really invite everyone to consider as a healing modality is spirit writing for those who find it comfortable. So, for example, in the morning, you might just meditate or get quiet and then just see what comes out of your hand, right? See what you start writing. Just it takes time. I mean, I'm saying I'm that's a very quick way to explain it. I'm actually going to be doing a class on the lifeafterlife.com website about spirit writing. But my experience, and I've been lucky, but my experience has been sometimes characters will just come to me and I'll write down their stories. And I've learned a lot. Or you can go to spirit to get guidance about things. And, you know, writing, if there are certain things we can do, we can put on I'm just the beats, the binaural beats to open
Mm.
up different
Mhm.
parts of our brains. And then early on in the morning, and just write and start seeing what emerges. And there are beautiful things that can come out, and we can get messages from spirit. This is a whole big category, so I can't say too much about it, but it is another really healing modality is to connect with all the ways that the invisible wants to communicate with us. And I shared with Ken one novel that I wrote where this character just came and announced himself. And I don't think, I think I'm, you know, I think I have some talent, but I also don't think I'm unusual. I think that everybody can tap into divine connection in a creative way that is healing. And I just believe it's available for whoever wants it.
the the power of creativity. I want to talk about that a little bit more, but you're describing first in automatic writing. We did have Catherine share a couple of thoughts that um, there is that term automatic writing, and that's the one I'm familiar with and have had personal experience with it. So I can very much resonate with what you're sharing. It can be an extremely um, powerful is almost cliche. It's a way of really getting insights that can come through to you and then get them out on paper, and that helps bring them into form. And they're not, and they don't just evaporate when they're more subtle, just as thoughts or pre-thoughts. Yeah, and it is powerful, as Catherine said. Your experience though with this character, I'd love if you would share a little bit more about, first of all, that this character in your novel just arrived to you, right?
Yeah. So this was many years ago, but I was just writing in my journal and I heard a character say, "My name is Carlos Pena and I have a story to tell. Are you willing to tell it?" And I said, "I would be honored. Go for it. Tell me." And he just started telling me who he was and where he came from. And over a 4 month period, it pretty much flooded out the first half of the book. The second half of the book was a little bit more of a struggle, but it was really magical. And I ended up going to Spain, and he told me things and places that I found out actually existed. So I don't know who he was. I don't know if he's someone I knew in a past life. I don't know if it's who I used to be. I don't know if it was my imagination. Maybe I read a book when I was a kid and I knew, the mystery exists. That's all I can say. And when a character comes and wants me to write their story, which happens in my life, it's just the most incredible honor in the world. And so this character came and I started writing the story. I went to Spain. I studied flamenco for a summer, and I don't know. I just trust. Again, it was trust. I trust. I met an artist the other day, a visual artist here in Dungarvan in Ireland, where am, and I was just sitting there, and he said, as an artist, it's a philosophy of trust because
Interesting.
I just love that phrase, and I wish I could do an Irish accent because it even sounded better the way he said it. But he said, it's a philosophy of trust, and that's part of what I love about what creativity is about for me. Because, when I took those key first piano lessons and I put together three chords, it's a philosophy of trust that something's going to come out you know, that's going to, I don't know, be meaningful to me in some ways. But that's going to, it's a philosophy of trust. I just loved when he said that a few days ago. And I feel like there's many ways I'm very insecure and all that and anxious about things, but there's an inherent philosophy of trust, and I think that's nurtured and deepened through the creative process. Because you put down two chords and then you put down another, and
Hmm.
I'll be darned, I have a melody. And then I work that melody, and then suddenly I have a musical, but it's like, you just keep, and it's again like the garden. You just show up, you keep planting the seeds, you keep watering it, or, yeah.
It also reminds me of the references we hear often to co-creating,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's the different
Mm-hmm.
either aspects of ourselves or it's all
Yeah.
oneness. So I guess it all is oneself, but yeah,
Exactly.
co-creating. Catherine had a couple of questions, and I see if you can answer these. How do you know it isn't a spirit versus a character? I guess is what you're thinking,
Oh, yeah,
Catherine.
great
And
question.
do you
Yeah.
feel it's from your creativity or from a spirit?
Yeah, that's a great question. They feel really different to me. Like my creativity feels really different than when I feel like it's a spirit. So I do feel that Carlos Pena was a spirit. I do. It just has a very different feeling about it.
And when you first shared the story with me, I want to make sure that you may have said this, but I just want to make sure that it's clear to our audience that you hadn't been to Spain, or at least the part of Spain that he shared with you several things about the town, etc.
At least,
You later went there and found those to be true.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's what was
absolutely.
so fascinating about the experience with that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I
And
mean,
so
tell
much.
me how that works.
And then try this. I've been working on a novel called The Lure. I started it many, many years ago. Many. And it was about an Irish indentured servant. And now I'm in Ireland. I never thought I was going to be in. I mean, like, what the heck? How? And I never finished the book for just life was busy. I never finished it. And as soon as I came to Ireland and started hearing music, certain kinds of music, I got these tingles, and the characters seemed to really stir in me again. And I was like,
Hmm.
wow, I wonder if there's a past life or spirit connection. So I definitely feel that, yeah, with certain characters, but not all. Yeah.
So I wanted to also share with you, and then obviously everyone with us now, and that will see this later, in the time since we caught up a month or so ago. I listened to a podcast. It's related to the last month's program. It comes from the telepathy tapes, which is now producing a related series called the Talk Tracks, and they're now producing that program weekly. And one of the recent additions of that related to, I think it was episode 3 of season 2 of the telepathy tapes, which was focusing on this um, this idea of creativity and where does it come from. And they shared several wonderful stories of artists of various types, writers, etc., who kind of, to be very generalistic about it, had that experience of I don't know where this came from, it just came through me kind of thing. And there's a fantastic story which I'm not going to recite all of, in that season 2 episode 3, of the telepathy tapes where they're talking about an experience with the author Elizabeth Gilbert, best known, I think, for Eat, Pray, Love, and how she interacted with this other person, Pilar Flynn. And the upshot of it was that one of them had the idea for a story that came to her, never got it into form. Years later, they meet the other person. They actually just they weren't lovers, but they exchanged the kiss, and they believe now in that moment the story passed from the one to the other, and the other brought the exact story with the exact character and whatnot into form, never having the first one didn't tell the other one about, hey, I was going to write this book. Maybe you want to. It was nothing concrete like that at all. And so the talk tracks episode was with the other person in that story, Pilar Flynn. She's a fascinating person, grew up in Ecuador and Chile, and then from 5 years old on, knew she was going to tell stories through film and got herself to Hollywood and spent a 20 plus growing, continuing year career in animation. And this whole story is this amazing story about how she got all these downloads in this very unusual experience where friends got together in the redwoods of California, and they're in the process of bringing to life an animated feature of one of Isabella Allende's short stories that she never gave the rights to do before. And the whole story is incredible. And so, yes, I mean, kind of been encouraging. Well, right. And so Eleanor just shared that Gilbert's fabulous book, Big Magic, is about this very subject. And magic is a big part of all of her books. And frankly, what Pilar shared in this episode, it's a very big part of Latin culture. And so I'm sharing all this in a way and rambling on a little bit about it because it is also just one of those things that as we talk about these things more, the it's can be amazing and it is amazing to watch how the creative process works, but also kind of normalize it and accept that yes, this is a part of who we are. And we get to enjoy these amazing creations that these gifted people share with us, but their gifts are often that they just have the ability to channel and to let these things come through.
Right, right. Because
So
the good
anyway,
stuff
in
always
response to
is,
that, Lisa,
yeah,
after
no,
my rambling
absolutely.
on
Great
forever.
story. No, 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 it's great. Yeah, the good stuff always comes from somewhere else, right? I mean, to me, the best stuff, my best writing always feels like it comes from somewhere else. Or my best, yeah, probably my best everything does. But absolutely.
So let's begin to say our goodbyes. Thank you again to everybody for joining us. Thank you, especially Lisa, for your courage, your openness, your authenticity, and your amazing talents for being able to stay up late. And if there's anything else about your work, you said you were teaching classes. Is there anything to wrap up that you want to share in terms of how people can contact you or find out more about what you've done, what you're doing?
Yeah, if anything I say interests you, contact me at, excuse me, smart coaching, SMARTT coaching at gmail.com. And I would just love to know what interests people because I'm kind of looking at the next part. This is a new beginning for me. Now that my daughter is better, my mom's passed on, and I'm here. I'll be teaching some courses in spirit writing, mostly spiritual memoir, and then I'm excited to get my musical out there. I'm just going to say this. If there's anyone who's a very musical person, I'm looking for a musical director. Why not just put it out into the universe? So if anyone's interested, let me know about that. But I would love to just hear your thoughts and the things that matter to you. Would be great. Anyway, thank you, Ken.
So
What a
lots
great
of thank yous in the comments. There's one question if you know when and where we could see the musical, or is it you're looking for
Oh,
someone to help
yeah,
you
it'll be
bring it?
spring 2027 in Asheville. But thank you. And if you email me, I'll get you on my mailing list. But it has a lot to do with near-death experiences. There's a lot in it about my work with Raymond. So it's kind of fun that way.
It sounds great. Well, Thank you again, Lisa, so much. Thank all of you who
Thank
are
you.
thanking Lisa and me and everything in the comments. Thank you all for being here. It's been
Thank
yet
you.
another magical night, to say the least, and really wish you the best. So
Thank you for the opportunity. It's really a
thanks
blessing.
so much, everyone. Thank you, Lisa. We'll stay in touch.